Hi, everybody. I miss seeing you all in class, and hopefully, we will be back again before school is out. But I just am going to go through these notes like we normally would in class, and then when you hopefully join virtually on either Wednesday or Friday, we will be able to answer questions and go through a bunch more examples together and that sort of thing. This is the only topic we're going to cover this week. Normally, we would do this in just one day in school, but that is fine. We're just going to do as much as we can without overwhelming you. So this is the goal of the week, is to be able to understand perfect squares and square roots and then to simplify radicals. So first of all, a radical is just a square root. Now we can have different ones. We can have a cube root and that sort of thing, but we will only deal with square roots. So the radical sign is what you see there. A simplified radical means the number inside cannot have any perfect square factors. All right, the number inside cannot have any perfect square factors. So if you remember, factors are numbers that multiply to the given number. So the given number we're going to talk about is the number inside the square root sign inside the radical. If you did not take a chance to fill out this paper, it was the first thing listed under Monday, you will definitely want to do that because that is our list of perfect squares. So those are the numbers we're going to be looking for. All right. So what then we do to simplify them is if you have two numbers under the two numbers that multiply to the number underneath, you can split that apart into two separate square roots. So the square root of A times the square root of B. Now next week we're going to look at going from here to here. All right, but for today we're going to look at if you have one given number, you need to split it into two numbers, and that splits into two separate square roots. Now one of those numbers, either A or B, needs to be a perfect square. So we'll talk about ones that don't work and that sort of thing as we go along. But that's your job, is to figure out what perfect square goes into the number I'm given. So we'll just start with number 1, the square root of 18. Now, if you think of factors of 18, 1 times 18 is 18. 3 times 6 is 18. So I could split this. I wouldn't write this down if I were you. I could split this into the square root of 3 times the square root of 6. All right, 6 times 3 is 18, so I can split that into two separate square roots. But neither 3 nor 6 is on my list of perfect squares. So that is not helpful. So our job is to find a number on our list that goes into 18. So that would be 2 times 9. So you're going to split 18 into 2 times 9 or 9 times 2. And then the square root has to go along it. Okay, so instead of just square root of 18, we're splitting it into the square root of 9 times 2. And then we know that the square root of 9 is 3. So the final answer, this is what your answers are going to look like today. 3 square root of 2 is how we say that. 3 times the square root of 2. So it's like taking out the square root of 9. All right, so 75. When you look through your list, hopefully you know that 25 goes into 75. Now, some of you are probably thinking, what if I don't know what the factors of any of these numbers are? Well, the easiest thing to do then is to take your calculator and start dividing. So 1 is a perfect square that goes into everything, but that doesn't count. So your first one you would try is 4. If you type in 75 divided by 4, you're going to get a decimal, so that doesn't work. 75 divided by 9 doesn't work. 75 divided by 16 doesn't work. 75 divided by 25 does work. So 75 is 25 times 3. So then you can do the square root and the square root. And then we know that the square root of 25 is 5. So our answer is 5 times the square root of 3. Now our next one is 180, and I'm going to show you two different ways to do 180. So what you might realize up here is that 18 times 10 is 180. So we've already done 18. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to first think, okay, 18 times 10. But that doesn't work because 18 and 10, neither one of those are perfect squares. But I do know that 9 goes into 18. So I'm going to make this 9 times 20 is 180. Okay, so the square root of 9 is 3, square root of 20. The only problem is that cannot be our answer, because what we wrote above is that a simplified radical means that the number inside does not have any perfect squares. Well, guess what? 20 has a perfect square. 20 can be broken into 4 times 5. So then I need to do the square root of 4 and the square root of 5. So this becomes 2 square root of 5. But we also have this 3 back here that we haven't used. So remember, when we say 3 square root of 20, we mean 3 times the square root of 20. So really, you need to bring the 3 down the whole time. And then 3 times 2 is 6. Square root of 5 is your final answer, because 5 cannot be broken down anymore. So that's the problem with just finding one perfect square, is if you don't find the biggest perfect square, you're going to have to do this in more than one step. So that makes it a lot harder. So I would recommend going past 9 to find another perfect square. So you don't have to, you can just keep doing it more than once, but if you only want to do it one time, you're going to have to use your list to find a bigger perfect square. Okay, so instead of doing two different parts and putting them together, 180 is actually 36 times 5. So we could have done square root of 36 times the square root of 5. So then right away we get 6 square root of 5. So obviously it's a lot easier if you find the biggest one right away, but if you don't, it's fine. You just have to split it into a couple of steps. Number 4 is a little bit tricky. When we think about things that go into 66, again, 6 times 11, well, that doesn't matter because neither one of those are perfect squares. So just thinking of factors is fine, but that's sometimes a lot of extra work. So again, you want to just see, do any of those perfect squares on my list go into 66? So 66 divided by 4 gives us a decimal. 66 divided by 9 gives us a decimal. 66 divided by 16 gives us a decimal. 66 divided by 25 gives us a decimal. Half of 66 is 33. So anything over 33 is not going to go into 66. So there are no perfect squares that go into 66. So there are no perfect square factors. You don't need to write that. Okay, you can just either rewrite square root of 66 or you can write simplified. Either one is fine with me. The reason we're doing this is because next year in geometry, you are going to be expected to know how to simplify these. So what will happen is your answer, you'll just leave it as square root of 66. So you might want to get used to just leaving it like that. Okay, 294 is a tricky one. It's a long one, or it's a big one. So again, I don't know what perfect squares go into 294. So I am just going to start dividing until I find one. So if I do 294 divided by 4 gives me a decimal. 294 divided by 9 gives me a decimal. 294 divided by 16 gives me a decimal. Divided by 25 gives me a decimal. 36 gives me a decimal. 49 gives me 6. So this is 49 times 6. So I just want to make sure 6 does not have any perfect squares in it, and it does not. So right away I know I found the biggest one. So I have square root of 49 times the square root of 6. So square root of 49 becomes 7 times the square root of 6. There's your final answer. Okay, now I'm going to do this one the long way again because I know that a lot of us, when we see 48, we're probably going to do 4 times 12. All right, and again, this is fine, but what you should realize is 12 has another 4 in it. Okay, so you should say, oh, wait a minute. If 4 goes in and 4 goes in, right? If you think of the factor trees that you used to do, you would do that. 2 4s means 16 goes in there. So the faster way would be to make that 16 times 3. Square root, 4, square root of 3. Okay, that's the fast way. If you forget, and that's fine, you do 4 and 12, you would have this becomes 2 square root of 12. But then again, 12 has another perfect square in it, so we got to break that apart into 4 and 3. You also need to bring that 2 down in front. So this is a 2. Remember, this is multiplication. This becomes 2, and then square root of 3. So 2 times 2 is 4. Square root of 3 is our final answer. I know I probably went too fast, so the nice part about having a video is you can go back and watch it more than once. You can pause it as much as you need to, and that sort of thing. Okay? So again, if you do this before we meet, that's great. We can go through questions and that sort of thing. There's a way to practice online, and then there's a worksheet also. But you probably don't want to do the worksheet until after you've talked with me about it, unless you want to try it and then ask questions. That's up to you.